If you're one of the millions of people who's worried about high blood pressure or looking to cut out sodium for their heart health, then this video is for you. I'm so glad you found it because as you were browsing, I'm sure you've seen some of the same tips shared over and over again, but I want to offer a few more that you maybe haven't heard of, and we're not going to waste any time, so let's get into the list right now. Now, this first one might seem a little bit obvious, but I'm always surprised at how many people are not rinsing their canned beans and vegetables. I think most of us grow up thinking, okay, we do the can opener bit and we get them drained and then just dump it straight into whatever it is we're making. But adding that rinsing step can actually reduce the sodium content by an additional 40%. And that's not nothing. So adding that, if it's feasible, can be a really good way to cut out some extra salt. Now, I totally understand that if you're making something like a chili, you probably want that volume or the other seasonings that are in there. Draining and rinsing isn't necessarily the best option. Another alternative you can try is frozen, because typically there won't be any added sodium or salt. Another good one is to look for the lower in sodium options. And I've got some tips at the end about what to look for on the packaging and nutrition facts label to get you there. All right, tip number 2, I think is gonna dredge up a few feelings for some of you, but my second tip is to replace some or all of the salt in your salt shaker with MSG. Now, hear me out because I have a feeling some of you had some kind of reaction when you heard me say that, but MSG or monosodium glutamate is an easy, affordable, and safe way to reduce the sodium in your home-cooked meals. Now, home cooking is not the biggest source of sodium in the standard American diet. That actually comes more from processed and packaged foods and restaurants and eating out. But if you do a lot of cooking at home and you're in the habit of reaching for that salt shaker whenever you're seasoning your food or sitting down to take a bite, then this could be an option. MSG only has about 2/3 the amount of sodium at the molecular level, and so that right off the bat is going to reduce sodium. But if you're a little bit nervous about that or want to kind of ease your way in, I recommend starting with a 50-50 blend. This is an example of one that we use at home. My partner's nickname when he was an athlete was Jets, so that's how we ended up with the name Jets Blend. But I think we've got some garlic powder in here, some black pepper, maybe a salt-free, like steak seasoning or something like that. And then about 1/3 of this mixture is MSG. We throw this on eggs, on our grilled foods, anytime we're making a salad dressing or a marinade. And it's just a really versatile and easy way to add not just a salty flavor, but also that savory umami flavor that MSG is known for. MSG is so affordable, especially when you start comparing it to some of the other spice blends or herbs and things that are a little bit more expensive in the flavor department. This is an example of a bag I found at my local Korean market. This is a 3-pound bag for $10, and that is almost a lifetime supply. I mean, even for someone like me who uses it all the time, this is really going to last. I didn't need quite that much, so I picked up a 1-pound bag for $3.99. And if you don't have a Korean market near you, you might look for it in your regular grocery store. You might see it as Accent or another similar brand name or store name, or shopping online can be a really convenient option. I will say that's not quite as affordable because unfortunately this Ajinomoto brand of MSG was about double the cost when I looked for it online. But again, if you don't have that option to shop locally, this could be another way to source it. And finally, just to address the elephant in the room, MSG is safe to consume at the levels you would typically be eating it. The beautiful thing about MSG is that it's self-limiting. If you start to use too much, your taste buds are gonna let you know and the food will no longer taste as appetizing. And when it comes to the safety, we have to remember that a lot of the myths about MSG causing migraines or other symptoms were rooted in a xenophobic anti-Asian myth against Chinese American restaurants. This myth originated in the 60s, and in the decades that have passed, it has not once been replicated in a clinical trial. As a dietitian, I have gone deep into the research, and I wouldn't be sharing this information if I didn't feel 100% confident that it was something I could feel good recommending to you. But as with everything, it comes down to personal preference, and this isn't the only way that you can reduce sodium in your cooking at home. So let's talk about my next tip, which has more to do with what you can add than what you can subtract. I think in most of the lists about reducing sodium or eating for heart health, you're gonna hear things about what to cut out or restrict. And I like to maybe flip that around and think about what can we add? What can we get more of? And the short answer, as it almost always is more fruits and vegetables. And that's because they are a high source of potassium. So my third tip is to add more potassium-rich foods to your daily meals and snacks. So the interesting thing about getting more potassium in our diet is that it can actually buffer some of the effects of sodium on blood pressure. That's because both sodium and potassium are minerals that act as electrolytes in the body, but they carry opposite charges. So they kind of work to cancel each other out in some ways. The current recommendations for potassium are 3,500 to 4,700 milligrams per day. But again, because most of us aren't eating enough of those potassium-rich foods like fruits, vegetables, legumes, things like that, we really aren't getting anywhere close to that. So while it might be ideal to get a 2-to-1 ratio of potassium to sodium, even just an equal amount is going to be a good move in the right direction. We can compare that to the recommended amounts of sodium, which according to the dietary guidelines should be kept at 2,300 milligrams per day. It's estimated that the average American is getting about 1,000 milligrams more, and if you're trying to stick to a low sodium diet, which is 1,500 milligrams or less, it's kind of tough to cut that amount in half and have it still taste decent. Because potassium is so important, we find it in a lot of foods that we can eat on a regular basis. That includes fruits like bananas, of course. I think personally it has something to do with this scene from this 90s movie. I mean, does anybody remember this scene and then had that like ingrained in your brain for the rest of the time that, okay, potassium, bananas, bananas, potassium? Just me. Okay. What's funny about this scene is he also glosses over dairy, which is a potassium-rich food. Anyways, that doesn't really matter. That's like for food science nerds. They're not the only source. So in addition to that, you can get potassium from kiwi, guava, a little bit from watermelon, avocados, tomatoes, or tomato products, including tomato paste, which I think is actually a huge myth that it has a ton of sodium. This particular example does not. When it comes to vegetables, I love recommending the humble potato. That's because especially when you leave the skin on, it can be a really nice way to, get some extra potassium. We can also look to dark leafy greens like broccoli, spinach, or Swiss chard, and other nourishing foods like beans, lentils, nuts, dairy, or salmon and other types of fish. Now, if you're like me, that list includes some of your favorite foods, and I don't need to be told twice to enjoy them more often. But the reality is sometimes we're eating out or shopping for packaged and convenience foods, and we're comparing labels and want to know what to look for. So these are the phrases and things that I think you should look for on a nutrition facts label to ensure that a low sodium food is actually what you get. So not all labels that you find on the front of the package are regulated by the FDA, but for something to be considered a low sodium food, it needs to contain 5% or less of the recommended sodium limit in each serving. Anything higher than that cannot be called a low sodium food, and anything with 20% or more per serving is considered a high sodium food. At that point, we've got a choice to make. Either we include it because it's what we really want, or we look for alternatives or maybe use some of the other tips on my list. Now, in some cases, a food can be called sodium-free if it contains 5 milligrams or less per serving, but more importantly, I think the label you should look for is no salt added or unsalted. That means that absolutely zero salt was added during the processing and packaging process, but that doesn't mean that it eliminates some of the naturally occurring sodium that might be in those foods. So if that's the case and it's not a truly sodium-free food, then it must also carry the second label phrase, which is, this is not a sodium-free food. So in this example, I guess, good job, Swansons, you're in compliance. Okay, and the one label I think you should be cautious of is the one that says lower in sodium. And that's because that's relative to whatever amount of sodium was in the original food, which could still be really high. Even if it sounds great, like 50% reduction, lower in sodium, that sounds all good and well, but when you compare it on the label and flip that package over, you might see it really truly is not a low sodium food for whatever it is you need. Now, my last and final tip doesn't actually have anything to do with the amount of sodium in food, but it has everything to do with satisfaction and flavor in the actual eating experience, and that is to serve your hot food hot. I know it sounds so simple, but hear me out. I harp on this all the time at home. I'm always like, hey, are you gonna reheat that? Or why don't you take a bite while it's still really warm? Because it simply makes our food taste better. As humans, our perception of flavors and aromas is really impacted by the temperature of our food. So think about that steaming hot bite, that very first bite you take when something is freshly cooked. It's gonna taste so much better and more flavorful than it is when it's lukewarm and cooled off. So as simple as it sounds, just reheating our food or serving it at the optimal temperature can make it taste that much better. Now, all of these small changes can be done over time, and with patience, our palates can actually adjust to either accept less sodium, meaning we don't necessarily prefer it, but we don't miss it as much, or we just get a little bit better at picking up on some of those other flavors and textures in our food. And at the end of the day, we all have choices to make in the moment. So in some cases, there might be a high sodium food that you love and it is just a non-negotiable to take it out of your diet forever. We get to choose when and how we still include that. But if it's something else that's maybe not worth it and a good alternative exists, then sure, why not use that when the option is available? I hope these tips have been helpful to make a low sodium diet taste just a little bit better. And if you enjoyed it, I hope you'll hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. My name is Kara, and I'm the dietitian behind Street Smart Nutrition. This channel is all about fearlessly nourishing meals. So leave me a comment and let me know what you think. Share this video with someone else who might find it helpful, and I'll look forward to seeing you in another one soon. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, comment, share, all those things. Let's try again.